A single aluminum can goes into a recycling bin on an ordinary afternoon, empty and crushed slightly under someone's boot without much thought given to it afterward. From there, it joins thousands of identical cans compressed into a single bale weighing roughly 1,000 pounds, one of hundreds sitting in rows at a processing facility waiting for its turn. The promise printed on the side of nearly every can insists this same piece of metal will come back as another can, ready to hold another drink someday soon. But a great deal happens to aluminum between a recycling bin and a store shelf, and it isn't obvious that the metal survives all of it intact along the way. Does that one can actually return as another can? Or does something about it get lost, downgraded, or diverted somewhere along the journey? Let's get into it right here on Small Things. The loop isn't automatic. Turning a used can back into a new one requires considerably more than simply melting it down, even though melting is the step most people picture first when they imagine the process. The aluminum has to be collected in the first place, separated from whatever else ended up in the same bin, stripped of anything not made of metal, melted down completely, adjusted carefully until its composition matches what a beverage can actually requires, and finally rolled to a precise thickness measured in thousandths of an inch. Skip any single one of those steps, and the aluminum might still get reused somewhere else entirely, just not necessarily as another can. The loop back to a can is genuinely possible from start to finish. It just isn't automatic. The money in the trash. It did not begin as an environmental campaign at all. It began as a company noticing how much real money was sitting inside America's trash cans, quite literally week after week. Aluminum recycled from scrap requires roughly 95% less energy than aluminum extracted fresh from bauxite ore, since it skips the intensive electrical process that separates raw metal from rock in the first place. Reynolds Metals, one of the major producers supplying the exploding beverage can market of the 1960s, recognized fairly quickly what that energy gap actually meant for their own bottom line. Every used can collected back from the public was a can the company didn't have to manufacture from scratch, using only a fraction of the electricity a brand new one would otherwise cost them to produce. Reynolds tested the idea with a small pilot program in Miami in 1967, offering cash on the spot for used aluminum brought in by ordinary people off the street. The following year, the company opened a permanent buyback center in Los Angeles, and the early results convinced Reynolds to expand the program out across the entire country rather than treating it as a one-off local experiment. What began as a handful of trailers parked in scattered parking lots and a genuinely modest starting budget grew, within roughly 2 decades, into a nationwide network collecting hundreds of millions of pounds of aluminum every single year, feeding nearly all of it directly back into new can production runs. The economics never really changed after that initial breakthrough, even as the scale of the operation grew dramatically larger with each passing decade of steady expansion. A can collected back from a recycling bin still costs a fraction of what a can made entirely from freshly mined ore would cost to produce today. And that persistent gap is the entire reason the elaborate industrial process documented in this video exists at all, still running around the clock without pause. Other manufacturers watched Reynolds pull ahead on cost and followed within a few years, building their own collection networks and processing plants rather than ceding that advantage to a single competitor until reclaiming aluminum stopped being one company's idea entirely and became simply how the whole industry expected to operate going forward. One can, 5 transformations. So, what actually happens to that one can between the recycling bin and the moment it becomes usable metal again. The bale holding that can gets broken open by a machine built for the job, and the loose cans spill onto a vibrating conveyor that feeds the plant in a steady, even stream. From there, the cans get shredded into smaller pieces, which accomplishes two things at once. Smaller scraps are easier for the furnace to melt evenly, and shredding guarantees no can still holds leftover liquid inside it. That second point matters more than it sounds. Liquid water expands roughly 1,000 times in volume the instant it turns to steam, and any can that still held liquid when it reached a furnace running past 1,200 degrees could trigger a violent eruption the moment that trapped moisture flashed into vapor. Before the shredded aluminum reaches the melting furnace, it passes through a process that strips away the paint and printed coating on its surface, a step called delacquering, since that thin painted layer would otherwise burn dirty and contaminate the batch. Only after that coating is gone does the clean scrap fall into the furnace and melt into liquid metal. Once molten, workers add small, carefully measured amounts of other metals like manganese to bring the mixture back to the exact alloy composition a beverage can requires, since scrap collected from many sources rarely arrives at that precise recipe on its own. A skimmed layer called dross, oxidized metal, and other impurities floating to the surface gets scraped off the top and set aside for separate processing. The cleaned, correctly balanced molten aluminum then gets cast into enormous ingots, some weighing tens of thousands of pounds apiece, cooled by a process that lets them solidify without ever touching the sides of a mold. Once an ingot has cooled enough to handle, it gets reheated just enough to become workable again and pass through a heavy rolling mill again and again, growing thinner and dramatically longer with every single pass, until a block that once stood a few feet tall has become a continuous coil of aluminum sheet stretching for miles. Chemistry isn't the bottleneck. It's easy to assume that every can dropped into a recycling bin comes back specifically as another can, since that's essentially the promise printed right on the packaging itself. Where the finished aluminum actually ends up depends on sorting quality, the exact alloy it gets blended into during processing, and current market demand at the moment it's rolled into finished sheet. Some recycled aluminum genuinely does return as beverage can sheet, exactly as advertised. Other batches end up in car parts, appliance panels, or entirely different aluminum products altogether, depending on what a given mill happens to be running that particular week and what specification the metal was adjusted to match. It's also tempting to hear that aluminum can be recycled forever and assume the entire system therefore has essentially no real losses anywhere along the way at all. The metal itself doesn't degrade chemically no matter how many times it gets melted down and completely reformed from scratch, cycle after cycle. Whether it actually gets that chance is a separate question entirely, and one that depends on choices made well before any furnace gets involved. In the United States, only around 4 in 10 aluminum cans actually make it into a recycling bin in the first place, and the rest end up buried in a landfill instead, regardless of how many more times that same metal could theoretically have cycled through a furnace and come out unchanged. A can's chemistry was never the limiting factor here. Whether someone bothered to put it in the right bin usually was. People along the loop. A sorting facility worker watches a stream of mixed recyclables pass beneath an eddy current separator on the line, a machine that uses a rapidly shifting magnetic field to fling aluminum cans clear of the glass and plastic riding the same belt beside them, sorting metal from everything else in a fraction of a second, without a single hand touching any of it directly. A furnace operator adjusts the burner temperature by a few degrees midway through a shift, working from a reading on the alloy composition that just came back from the lab down the hall, since scrap arriving from 100 different cities never quite behaves the exact same way twice, even when the paperwork says it should. At a can manufacturing plant hundreds of miles away from the recycling facility itself, a machinist threads the leading edge of a freshly delivered aluminum coil into a stamping press early one morning. The very same coil that began as a stack of crushed cans collected from curbside bins only a matter of weeks earlier that same month. A shopper picks a cold can off a store shelf on her way home from work without giving it a second thought, unaware that the aluminum sitting in her hand may have already circled through a furnace and a rolling mill more times over the years than she could easily guess, standing there in the aisle. What actually breaks? That original can, crushed and tossed into a bin on an ordinary afternoon without much thought given to it, really can come back as another can, because melting it down never erases what makes it aluminum in the first place, no matter how many times that happens. But that return trip depends entirely on a long chain of specific steps working correctly, one after another, from collection through sorting through, melting, through rolling, with no shortcuts available anywhere along the way. The metal itself is fully capable of surviving that cycle indefinitely, over and over, without any real loss of quality at any stage. What actually breaks the loop, far more often than any limit built into the metal itself, is everything happening around it, long before the aluminum ever reaches a furnace at all. If this changed the way you look at the can in your own hand, let us know in the comments below what you want us to explore next in a future video. We might make it our next episode. Thanks so much for watching. History often hides in the smallest details.